Chairman, thank you for this opportunity. It's really nice to see all of these friendly faces, and I know most of them. It often happens that I speak to crowds, and then you can't gauge the crowd because you don't know the faces, and and sometimes they make you sick. I've been to the Northern Cape most of this year, and I contracted COVID towards the end of April. I'm just wearing this mask this morning because I don't have flu. I have a common cold, and it's just to make sure and that you feel comfortable in my presence. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I must congratulate you on your Congress theme. There are a few threats to livestock farmers, and one or two particularly for wool farmers. I think the most important threat to wool farmers currently is producing wool responsibly. Biosecurity stays a major threat for the livestock industry in South Africa. But there's also one that is called climate change. You get the two groups of people. The one group say there is absolutely no climate change. And we are going to look at that this morning. But if you don't believe in climate change, at least another threat or a similar threat, it's just in another word, is the erratic climate. And I think a lot of you guys sitting here you have experienced the erratic nature of the climate the past few years. And I'm going to look into that this morning. I do a lot of work on this currently. Okay. Now, what are the issues in terms of the erratic climate or climate change? And are they man-made, or are we just in a normal cycle of the world's climate? Now, there's three issues. The one is temperature, the second one is carbon dioxide, and the last one is rainfall. So I'm going to look at the three. Now, there's a graph showing the average temperature of the world the past 600,000 years. Now, I know 600,000 years ago, they haven't had any thermometers, and I'm going to show you another graph where they look at the ice cores, just giving you the same sort of a rhythm over many years. But what we see in that, in essence, is that we do get hot periods in the climate of the world, and we also get so-called ice ages, or long periods of rather lower temperatures. So that's normal for the Earth, this rhythm, and it's changing from hot to cold and hot to cold. Let me show you another graph. This is climate data from Greenland ice cores, and it shows exactly the same rhythm. It's for a few hundred years, thousands of years, we're in a warmer climate, and then suddenly it changed to colder. What is important, though, is that we currently in a hot phase of the world's temperature. So take note of that. There is variability over shorter times as well. But currently, we're in one of those hotter periods, long periods, with variability in between. Let's look at temperature. Way back in the 1990s, when they started with forecasting what is climate change going to do to our climate, the most important forecast was that it will get hotter over Southern Africa. Since that forecast, if we look at the measurement of what happened to temperature, the average temperature over South Africa increased by 1 degree Celsius versus 0.65 in the rest of the world. So we're getting actually, the increase in temperature is more rapid in Southern Africa and specifically in South Africa than in the rest of the world. Take note of that, because that's something that you as a livestock farmer must manage, and you must be aware of this. I think in essence what I'm trying to tell you is that we're in for a hotter climate. Now, you may say that 1 degree Celsius isn't that much, but we'll have a look into that. Let's look at carbon dioxide, because this is an interesting one. Now, carbon dioxide is one of a few gases that is contributing to the climate change. The other one is methane. The jury is not out on methane and the effect of that on the climate. It looks like they forecasted that we as livestock producers, we are contributing to this increase in temperature because of the methane gases coming out of our livestock. Now it seems it's not that big a problem. But let's leave it there. I want to focus on carbon dioxide because this is a very interesting one. Let's look at the variability of CO2 over the last 400,000 years. And once again, you will see this variability, this up and down graph of the CO2 concentration in the world's atmosphere over the last 400,000 years. What is interesting, though, is that we are now in so-called uncharted territory. You will see that it varied between more or less 300 parts per million in the atmosphere to just under 200. Now, I'm not going to discuss why that happened. That happened because of our plants that captured the CO2. But if you see there's this up and down between 300 and more or less 180. But suddenly, since the 1910s, it just got away, and in 2015 we were at 400. We're currently at about 430 parts per million. Now the question is, what now? What about this increase in CO2? It's obviously in 1910 was the beginning of using fuels and coal for industrialization of the world's economy. Now, since late 1800s, it increased from 275 parts per million to more than 400, and it's still increasing. And CO2 and other gases are driving the global warming and changing weather patterns. But now, in terms of we as okay, let's look at the last one, rainfall, because before I go on with CO2. The forecast in the 1990s was that there's going to be a change in the distribution and the quantity of rainfall. And the general forecast was it's going to get wetter in the east and it's going to get drier in the west. And yeah, let me don't say that. What was measured from the mid-90s until today, that there's a marginal decrease in autumn rainfall only in the central parts of South Africa. That's now the Free State, that area, and northeast, Mpumalanga towards Natal. A marginal decrease in autumn rainfall and no change in average rainfall, annual total rainfall, no change. So that is what we know about the rainfall right now. But it was forecasted in the 1990s that more extreme weather patterns will prevail. And if we look at the number of rainfall days over South Africa, that actually decreased in the central areas as well as the northeast part of South Africa. So the number of rain days decreased. But I said to you that the average annual rainfall did not decrease. So if the number of days that this average, the same average, falls, then obviously the rainfall is getting more erratic. And we get more extreme weather patterns. The dry periods are getting drier, and the wet periods are getting wetter. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have experienced that this past year. We had lots and lots of rain in certain areas, and other areas that are still dry. So that is one of the things, and I think this is one of the more important things that you as livestock farmers have to be able to contend with if you want to keep on farming with livestock, is this erratic nature, and it's getting more extreme. Okay, what now? If you listen to Greta Thunberg and you ask her who caused it, it's us sitting here who caused it. How dare you? I mean, for us as livestock farmers, it's irrelevant who caused it. What is relevant? Where are we in Earth's climate cycle? I've shown you it's getting hotter. Rainfall is getting more erratic, and CO2 is going through the roof. Secondly, how is the livestock farmer affected? I'm going to look at that in a short while. And the third one is the most important one for you guys. What can you do to mitigate any negative effects? If you don't develop a system on your farm to mitigate the negative effects, you're in for trouble. But fortunately, we know the South African livestock farmer is incredibly adaptive. They can adapt quickly. If you look at the past 150 years of livestock farming in South Africa, it's a known fact that the livestock industry has this ability to adapt and adapt quickly and adapt properly. But there are individuals who don't adapt. And as they say, adapt or die. So it's important that you understand what the threats are and how can you, as a farmer, mitigate that and turn it maybe around, because I think there's a silver lining to this as well, and I'm going to show you as well. And then lastly, how can we utilize the positive effects? Because there are also positive effects. It's not only negative. And I want to show you that as well. Okay. What do we know? It's getting warmer. We're experiencing more extreme weather patterns. The averages didn't change so far. I'm not saying that it's not changing. But so far, it can't be proven that it has changed. But what is proven that it's more extreme, the weather patterns. Johan van der Berg talk about that often. And CO2 levels are high and increasing. So what now? It's getting warmer. It's more a problem for the livestock in terms of heat stress. So we can say that 1 degree Celsius on average through the year is not much. But 1 degree Celsius for livestock is quite extensive, and they must be able to deal with this heat stress. If they don't deal with the heat stress, their production goes down. And the first one to be influenced is reproduction. And how do we manage that? I think the wool farmer over many years, I think since the 1940s, has managed this very, very well, because they make sure that they farm with animals that is adapted to their climatic conditions. They know how to select animals that under my conditions produces or give you the best production. So that's one that you as wool farmers don't struggle to deal with. There's other parts of the livestock industry that really struggles with this one. And then it's adapted production systems that make sure that you don't, for example, lamb in the hottest time of the year, when we experience this high increase in temperature. And then in the Western Cape, maybe shade, especially in the Swartland area. I tell you, when I travel in the Swartland area in December, January, especially February, it's incredibly hot. And then I see these wool sheep with the one's head under the other one's belly just to get a bit of shade. And I think this you know, under shade, there could easily be a 5 degrees Celsius difference. Okay. The fact that it's getting hotter is not such a big problem for plants. Plants can experience heat stress, that is true. But they experience specifically heat stress in combination with a scarcity of water. But this increase in heat units, and I'm going to explain it shortly to you why, also leads to higher plant production as long as there is sufficient water available. So heat isn't a problem for most of our plants. They can deal with the heat. They can actually convert this higher temperature, this higher number of heat units. They can convert that into production as long as there is sufficient water available. So water management in the ground, in the soil, is incredibly important for you. You shouldn't ask your neighbor, how much rain did you have? You should ask, how much of that rain is in the soil? That is the important one. So managing your system, your farming system, your grazing system, to increase infiltration of rainwater. Water is going to get scarcer when we get this wetter and drier periods. That is going to be vital for you guys. If you can manage that, this increased temperature is going to be your benefit. It will improve production. And we know for a fact, especially because of the lifelong research that was done by Professor Henny Snyman, that fields in a good condition have more soil available water because of different reasons. So if you're farming with field, make sure that your field is in the best possible condition, because that will make sure that most of the rainwater infiltrates into the soil. Okay, then, and I'm going to have just shortly look at this, but bush encroachment is also taking this increase in temperature to expand and to grow better. And you guys in the Karoo shouldn't think that you don't have a problem with bush encroachment. I think you don't yet realize that, because there's a huge problem in your area, Peter, with cutbos, you know, the likes of that. It's encroaching, and it's doing it so slowly that you don't realize it. Excuse me. Okay, how do you deal with the increase in high-intensity rainstorms? Because that is what is happening now. When you get rain, you get it over a shorter period and less days. So obviously, you get more high-intensity rainstorms. Once again, healthy field. Healthy field, you've got better cover, lower water flow rate, more infiltration. Better cover, less evaporation, and more transpiration. I'm going to just quickly look at that. And then a better species composition with a healthy root zone. Now, that is something that we as pasture scientists didn't realize for many, many years. And we learned that from the guys who's growing maize. The important part is the soil, inside the soil, and what is happening there. And there's you have to create a healthy root zone with high infiltration rates. Going to skip this one for time's sake. Let's look at what is happening with the increase in CO2 levels. I think this is something that you must take note of, because it's going to your benefit. This is one of the silver linings of what is happening right now. Now, those of you who weren't at a proper high school like me, I will just quickly explain to you what happens during photosynthesis. It's actually it's one of the most important systems that is at work for you as livestock farmers. Now, a green plant needs sunlight, and it doesn't need the light. It needs the energy from the sunlight. So a green plant will use sunlight in combination with carbon dioxide and water. Those three components are incredibly important in terms of photosynthesis. And they will produce sugars. Now, sugars, they are the basic building blocks of your plant production. And it will then give off oxygen. But what is important is you need sunlight, or the energy, you need carbon dioxide, and you need water to produce filth. Now, I quickly want to look at the system of how the CO2 is absorbed by the plant. And there you will see the stomata that is under the leaf of green growing plants. Now, in order for the plant to inhale the CO2, to get it into its system, to combine with the energy and the water to produce sugars, it has to open let's call it the mouth of the stomata. The higher the CO, before I go there, the moment it opens that stomata, that mouth, it loses a lot of water that is already inside the system of the plant to the atmosphere. So the bigger it opens the stomata, the higher the loss of water to the atmosphere, which is not good for the plant. The smaller it can open to get sufficient concentrations of CO2, the better for the plant, because it's losing less water for the same concentration of CO2 that it's taking into its system. Now, what is happening at these very high CO2 levels right now is that the plant can just barely open the stomata and get exactly the same concentration of CO2 into its system. So it's actually losing less water per CO2 that it's taking into the system. So it is actually improving the water use efficiency of the plant. It takes in the same amount of CO2, but with less water that is now going back into the atmosphere. And that is actually improving the production of all the plants. So we get this, what we call increased water use efficiency, the same amount of CO2, but with less transpiration of water out of the system. And in the case of grasses and shrubs, it has been shown in under field conditions, that increase in production can vary between 5% and 20%. So guys, your grazing capacity is going to increase. It already increased because of the better water use efficiency of CO2. But to maximize this increase in water efficiency, you need to have healthy field. You need to have good plants that can make use of that CO2. You need to have more water in the soil. You need to have plants with a natural higher water utilization or efficiency. And those plants only occur in field in a good condition. And the end result is an incremental increase in dry matter production. The Americans talk about CO2 fertilization that is actually happening now. So that is a silver lining. But if you want to manage it, make sure that your field is in the best possible condition that you can have it. So if you go back to the farm tomorrow, and you don't keep this at the back of your mind. It's also true about planted pastures, George. The right mix of planted pastures can also contribute a lot to the CO2 fertilization, and I'm going to show it to you right now. Professors Bond and Mitchley did a wonderful study on the effect that CO2 is having on root production. Now, it's root production of all your plants. In this case, they specifically look at sweet thorn, Acacia carew, Valchelia carew, the new name these days. And at 180 parts per million, that's the first photograph. You can see that ridiculously small root system of that sweet thorn. And as the CO2 concentration increases, the root mass of sweet thorn just increases. It's true about all plants, but it's specifically true about C3 plants. Now, C3 plants are trees, shrubs. Lucerne is a shrub. So they are particularly favored by this increase in CO2. Look at the last one. The CO2 level there was 450 parts per million. We're almost there in terms of our natural CO2 in the atmosphere. Look at that absolutely huge root system. So what CO2 is doing, especially to C3 plants, and especially to plants that is a problem to us, they're making them super plants. And you can use it to your advantage by looking at what you plant under planted pasture conditions. Go for those C3 plants. That's non-grasses. Grasses will also benefit, but your C3 plants like lucerne and all your legumes are C3 plants. They will benefit particularly because of the increase in CO2. The Karoo guys also have a lot of legumes in their system, but you don't get it in poor veld. You only get it in good quality veld. I think it's truth about the grasslands of South Africa as well. The moment the grasslands in South Africa improve, you see this increase in legumes, small little legumes. Okay, so bad news for the guys in the savanna areas. This. Okay, the increased CO2 levels, we do get more aggressive bush encroachment. The savanna areas are changing to thickets. Animals can't even penetrate some of those thickets. In the northern Transvaal in Limpopo, they try to manage that through wildlife. Forget it. If you don't bring in animals, elephants, lots of them, and black rhino, you're not going to control that absolute explosion of bush encroachment. In the grasslands, we have bush encroachments. Our grasslands are changing to savanna right now. And I think a lot of you farming in those grassland areas in the Free State and in Mpumalanga, you experienced that. And the Nama Karoo, that's the Karoo guys, there's a lot of bush thickening. There's particularly three species that is thickening up there, that is just getting more and more. And the last thing that I want to tell you, and especially you guys that burn your veld from time to time, these bush species, they're getting more tolerant to fire because of their increased root mass. So 40 years ago, it was still possible to burn them to death. These days, you just put them back for a year or two and they come back with a vengeance. And that is interesting, the work that was done by Professor Trollope in the Kruger Park. Okay, but the good news is in terms of CO2 is, if you look after your veld and you plant the right mix of planted pastures, and you make sure that you get enough of your rainwater into the soil, you will get a much better grazing capacity. And I predict that it's going to happen. Okay. Chairman, I promised you that I will finish within 40 minutes. I think it's the first time in my career. My take-home message to you guys is that you must learn what climate change is, what is happening, and you must learn how to mitigate that. It's getting warmer. How do you mitigate that? Adaptable animals and production systems and shade. The silver lining is that the more heat units will give us improved dry matter production. So it's not only a bad thing, it's also to our benefit. Once again, the better your veld condition, the better your selection of planted pasture, the more this benefits. The climate is getting more extreme, especially the rainfall. Rainfall is getting more extreme. How do you mitigate that? Healthy veld and better drought preparedness. Mr. Chairman, if I have a few minutes left, I think I will just quickly tell them a short story about you in terms of drought preparedness. And then CO2 is increasing, that we know. The silver lining is there is CO2 fertilization. Increased water use efficiency of the plant because of the small opening of the stomata and an improved dry matter production. The elephant in the room is increased bush encroachment. The elephant in the room is also the worse your veld condition, the more you are going to be affected by these three factors. So if your veld is not in a good condition, I think it's time to start working on it right now. We still have until 2050 to correct that. It's more than enough time. Chairman, that's my story for the day. I just quickly want to share something about Gilo. It's a beautiful story. Many years ago, I think it was in the early 1990s, Gilo invited me. I was still at the Department of Agriculture at the time, and Gilo invited me to a meeting in Fraserburg. And what they did in Fraserburg is they invited all the older farmers. His dad was at that meeting as well. And they said to the older farmers, I mean, you're now at the end of your career, but you farmed for 40 years. How did you deal with drought over all these years? And I tell you, those older farmers, they just couldn't stop talking. And we made a whole list of what they did to mitigate drought. Very interesting. I still have it to this day. Gilo, I believe you also have that list. We drew up that list. We gave it to all the younger farmers because we also invited all the younger farmers. They didn't say a word that day. They just listened. I think your dad was there as well, Peter. And then we talked to the younger farmers and say, okay, now you must now develop your own drought mitigation system. And I can remember vividly that Gilu's plan was, number one, is to farm with a portion of Hummels. He had Hummelveld, and he decided to farm with a portion of Hummelveld, with Hummels, because at that time he didn't farm with Hummels. He was going to farm with Hummels in that field. And when a drought comes, he will just sell off the Hummels quickly, so that he can carry on with his reduced number of ewes. He also had a few other strategies that he decided upon. The one, and that's the most important strategy that he decided upon, is to have a stocking rate of around 70-75% of his farm's potential, to make sure that his farm is in the best possible condition. I can remember that too. A few years ago, I was at NWJ. He phoned me. He said to me, this drought is now developing quickly. What do you think I must do? I said to him, Gilu, but you know what you must do. You made a decision in the 1990s that at the next drought, when you get to a point where you see that your grazing is getting less, you're going to sell the Hummels. He didn't actually phone me to ask me. He phoned me to tell me. He said, I'm not going to sell the Hummels. I'm going to sell some of my ewes. And I'm going to increase the number of Hummels. I said to him, why? He said to me, I haven't fed my Hummels since the start of the drought, but I'm feeding my head off with the ewes. So he did that. Now, fortunately, he takes part in the economic study groups of the national wool growers. And I can tell you guys, he made this decision. He decreased his number of ewes, which sounds, at the time, it sounded to me ridiculous to do something like that, because that is your production stock. He increased the number of Hummels, and he increased his net farming income the next year by 21%. Not because of an increase in income, because of the drop in cost. So what I want to say by that, Gilu, is that you should have a longer term drought strategy in terms of climate change. And you should stick to that. But please be adaptable on a day-to-day basis as well, because we know that the South African livestock farmers that survived the last 20 years, that is exactly what they did. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you.